Good evening, scholars. We're going to be looking at turning fractions into their simplest form. So if you would turn to your math notebook to page 23, date in the corner, today is the 26th. Your title is What are fractions in their simplest form? When a fraction is in its simplest form, the numerator and the denominator have no common factors other than 1. Okay, so this is when you're changing fractions, when we find equivalent fractions. This one is technically reducing it to the smallest fraction it can be, because after you get to that point, there's nothing you can divide it to make it any smaller. Let's go through some examples. Remember that we talked about before that with factors, it's different than with multiples. With factors, there are very few factors. Okay, you run out of factors. With multiples, remember there are very many multiples, and that can go on and on and on. But we're going to find their factors. Okay, so our first example is 1/2. We're going to see if 1/2 is in its simplest form. So if we list the factors for 1, we have 1 in itself. Okay, so the only factor for 1 is 1. The only factors for 2 are 1 and 2. Okay, do these numbers, 1 and 2, have any factors that are in common besides for 1? If you said no, you are correct. The only common factors between the two are 1. So this one is in its simplest form. So there are no equivalent fractions for 1/2 that are less than 1 and 2. Okay? We cannot make this fraction any smaller than the numbers in this fraction any smaller than they already are. So therefore it is in its simplest form. Let's look at 2/10. So we're going to look at the factors for 2 and the factors for 10. So once you list the factors, you can see that 2 is a common factor for 2 and for 10. If you actually go and divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number, 2, you can reduce that fraction to its simplest form of 1/5. So if you needed to, you could take the 1/5 and write out the factors for 1 and 5. Or if you remember that 1 and 5 are both prime numbers, that their only factors are going to be 1 in itself, then you would know that 1/5 is the simplest form, but 2/10 has 2 as a common factor, and is therefore 2/10 is not the simplest form of that fraction. Now we're going to look at 5/7. So list out the factors of 5 and 7. Do they have any common factors other than 1? Then complete your explanation. Next, we're going to look at 6/8. List out your factors for 6. List out your factors for 8. Then decide if 6/8 is the simplest form. Can you find the simplest form if it's not? And the final one you're going to look at is 9/10. Write out the factors for 9. Write out the factors for 10. Decide if 9/10 is the simplest form. Do they have any factors in common other than 1? Write out your explanation, and these are ones we're going to go over in class tomorrow. So, down at the bottom of the page, I want you to write any conclusions. Did you see any patterns? Or is there anything you can look for to know that a fraction is in its simplest form? Write what you think here, and we'll go over it in class tomorrow. Be sure you have filled in what you think on these ones right here that we'll go over tomorrow. I do want to see this section completed. That's what I'll be checking for to get your dojo point. and to write your conclusion. If you notice any patterns or if you didn't see any patterns, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Have a good night, scholars.